Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey, and every weekday I read one chapter of the Bible and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 7. Follow my advice, my son. Always treasure my commands. Obey my commands and live. Guard my instructions as you guard your own eyes. Tie them on your fingers as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Love wisdom like a sister. Make insight a beloved member of your family. Let them protect you from an affair with an immoral woman, from listening to the flattery of a promiscuous woman. While I was at the window of my house, looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked common sense. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. It was at twilight in the evening, as deep darkness fell. The woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. She was brash, rebellious type, never content to stay at home. She is often in the streets and markets, soliciting at every corner. She threw her arms around him and kissed him. And with a brazen look she said, "I've just made my peace offerings and fulfilled my vows. You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are. My bed is spread with beautiful blankets, with colored sheets of Egyptian linen. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink our fill of love until morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses. For my husband is not home. He's away on a long trip. He has taken a wallet full of money with him and won't return until later this month." So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once, like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. He was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing that it would cost him his life. So listen to me, my sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your hearts stray away toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path, for she has been the ruin of many. Many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. One thought. There's a certain irony in the book of Proverbs, because these sayings and chapters were written by Solomon. And in Proverbs chapter 7, Solomon warns against illicit sex and the immoral woman. And yet Solomon himself was undone by giving himself to immorality. If you read ahead in 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon married many foreign women that turned his heart to the Lord. And so I think this actually should give us an even deeper appreciation for his warning and take his warning to heart and do better than he did. And remember, Solomon is writing this to his son to guide him and help him prepare for leadership. And one of the things that can destroy your life is sexual sin. And so Solomon is warning his son against this. And he also, in this chapter, chronicles the path of temptation, especially the path of lust. And I think there's actually a lot of parallels to how this temptation works in Proverbs 7 to how the serpent's temptation worked in Genesis chapter 3. And so there's parallels, I think, in this text back to that original temptation. And we see, number one, that temptation begins with a target. Temptation begins with a target. This woman says, she is seeing these naive young men in verse 7, and it says one in particular who lacked common sense. And so she sees a vulnerability here. There's this naive young man who doesn't really know any better. He hasn't been trained. He hasn't been taught. He hasn't been guided in his life. And she zeroes in on him, much like the serpent zeroed in and targeted Eve. There's a lot of Old Testament scholars see the serpent being very deliberate in picking out Eve in the garden because Adam was given the task to cultivate and keep or guard or watch over the garden. And so it seems as if the serpent is picking out Eve because she's maybe a little bit more vulnerable than Adam would have been, and she's isolated from her husband in that moment. That's not excusing Adam's actions, because ultimately he is responsible for the first sin. But temptation begins with a target. And so knowing our weaknesses, knowing our weak points is incredibly important. What can temptation target in our hearts and in our life? And then we see, number 2, temptation tries to capture our attention. And so Solomon, describes this woman that she is seductively dressed, and then she throws her arms around him. She's pulling him aside. She's kissing him, right? So temptation tries to capture our attention, and it really preys on our desires, what we want. And the woman in Genesis chapter 3, right? Eve saw the fruit as pleasing to the eyes. So it captured her attention, and this woman is dressed in a way to capture this man's attention. Sin presents itself, temptation presents itself as something alluring, something that is beautiful in a sense, something that we would want. And so that's important here to recognize that, right? Like, not everything that is appealing to us is good for us, and we need to be wise and discerning about that. Then we see that temptation just outright lies. And so, right, that's so well exemplified in the Garden of Eden, where the serpent just flat out lies to Eve eventually and says, no, you're not going to die, right? God said, don't eat that fruit, but no, or you'll die, but no, you're not going to die. That was an outright lie, just outright contradiction, where the temptation is trying to say, don't follow God's path, go down this path. But we see these subtle lies coming out in this temptation as well. The woman says, you're just the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are, in verse 15, making this naive young man seem like he's exactly what she's looking for, that he's been on her mind all day, and that's not true. It says he's just wandering down the street, and this woman happens to cross paths with him, right? So she's lying to him, saying, yo, you're one in a million. You're exactly what I'm looking for. You're on my mind. You are everything I've been dreaming of. And that's a total lie. It's just a happy or really unhappy accident that they crossed paths. And she's just using these lies to draw him in. And then also, I think there's some subtle lies, or at least not fully knowing what the future holds here. And when she says, my husband is away on a long trip, he won't return until later this month. Does she know that? Like, does she really know, like, when her husband will return? You have to think about, in the ancient Near East, there's no phones, there's no texting. So you go on a trip, you just leave, and then you come back. So I don't really think she knows the timeline, and that's putting him in grave danger, because other proverbs have said, right, like, if you're caught doing adultery, the husband is not going to forgive you, and he will hunt you down. And so it just lies. And then finally we see the outcome is death. Temptation leads to death. In the garden, Adam and Eve disobeyed, and it brought them spiritual death and eventually physical death. And here the immoral woman is described that her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. So giving into sin, particularly sexual sin, it can seem pleasurable in the moment, but its future is deadly. And so we must run to Christ, flee to Christ, find hope in Christ alone, because only He can give us the wisdom to be on the lookout for temptation and resist it and live.